Hi everyone, we are here today at the Mah Society. We're missing Bridget, unfortunately, but we're still gonna have so much fun. And let's go. Hello everyone, welcome back. So today we are at the Mah Society with.
Doug Mah,
And I'm Viola.
And can you tell us a bit about yourselves?
go ahead.
I grew up in Calgary and moved to Edmonton just after high school, but my dad is a Ma from the same area of China, the same county as a lot of the Ma's in Edmonton. And my parents were very active in the Ma Society in Calgary when I was growing up. And now, years later, I'm a director at the Ma Society of Edmonton.
Doug Mah, I grew up in Edmonton, born and raised in Edmonton. My dad had a grocery store. I had a couple of grocery stores when we were growing up. So I spent most of my youth working in a grocery store. Um, my dad was also a director at the Mah Society. He passed away in 2012, and 2017, 2018, I became a director of the Edmonton Mah Society.
So can you speak a bit about what the Mah Society is?
It's almost easier to explain what the Ma Society, how the Ma Society started, and what the Ma Society used to be. Not so long ago, there were quite a few different family societies in Edmonton, and based on different family names and surnames. And so, if your last name is Wong, then you could go to the Wong Family Society. And a long time ago, it might be a place to stay. It might be a place where you could get a lead on a job, or help filling out forms, help sending a letter back home to China. And then they evolved into social clubs where you might meet weekly to cook a meal together, or you might hang out, play mahjong, or just celebrate and support each other.
It really started out back in the early 1900s when Chinese men, boys, were immigrating to Canada to work on the railroad. They would work here, send money back, and for a lot of them, they would be the only ones from their family in Canada or Edmonton. So the societies were created as a place for them to gather, to be with people from the same region, potentially maybe some cousins or brothers as well that would be here.
Mm-hmm.
And like Viola says, this is also a rooming house. When they first come to Canada, before they would get an apartment, get their jobs, they would provide like a room for them as a rooming house for these people until they got a job and started off their life. And it was also a place to gather, right? Just to hang out, to be with similar people from the same villages, maybe same last name, basically, right?
Yeah.
People spoke your language.
Yeah.
One of the coolest events that we have coming up right away is in conjunction with the launch of the paper trail. And it's actually the paper trail to the 1923 Exclusion Act. This was a beautiful exhibit that was put on in Vancouver. And now the curator, Catherine Clement, has written a book about it.
She wrote a book based on some of the stories of the people that submitted their head tax certificates. So a little bit of background. There was an Exclusion Act for Chinese immigration, made it very difficult for people to come to Canada of Chinese descent by charging a head tax. It started off, I think, with $50, if I remember correctly, and it went up to $500. Wow. And we're talking early 1900s.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. So people, when they paid the head tax, they had a certificate, and they, I don't remember the exact year, it's down in the exhibit, but they repealed the act, and about maybe 15, 20 years ago, they compensated all the people that had paid this head tax. But it was very difficult to get compensated. You had to be the person that paid the head tax or the spouse. No surviving family were able to apply for those certificates, for the reimbursement for those.
Wow.
So a lot of people still have those documents. And the museum in Vancouver, the Canadian Chinese Museum, had a project where they tried to get as many of these scanned and archived.
Just the small bit that I've learned being at the Mah Society in the past year, I had no idea that it was only Chinese people who were subject to a head tax.
Mm-hmm.
No other immigrants from any other country in the world were ever subject to a head tax. I had no idea how long it went on. I didn't really have a lot of thought about what it meant for men to be alone here
Mm-hmm.
without the next generation, without a spouse, without children to spend time with, enjoy, pass on stories, or any of the things that you do with your nieces, nephews, kids, grandkids. And then there's a whole other side of it too, with the women that were left behind in China,
Mm-hmm.
while husbands, brothers, and fathers and uncles were half a world away working in Canada.
Yeah, it kind of opens your eyes a little bit to kind of like the
Absolutely.
history of, the Mah Society and the different
Mhm.
societies that we have here in Edmonton. It's very I think amazing what you guys are doing, and you're
Mhm.
able to kind of share the history and make sure that the good and the bad is told, which I think is great and should be
Yeah.
told.
So this is the beginning of the exhibit of the Journey of the Horse, and it's a bit of a narrow passageway, and the idea is that it's evocative of the traveling overseas on the ships and the cramped quarters. The curators, Sue Ma and Andrea Maru, have sourced out these archival photos of part of the experience of Chinese men and boys coming over to Canada to work, primarily on the railway. There's a great photo here of 3 bellboys working at the Lake Louise Chalet back in the day. And then it opens up to a bit about the head tax and passing through immigration. Doug mentioned that Journey of the Horse is more about the overall Chinese experience in Canada, where the main floor is specifically about the history of the Mah Society in Edmonton.
So we saw on your website the Journey of the Horse.
Yes.
Could you speak a bit about that?
So I can give you a little bit of a background on that. The main floor here for the Mah Society, it's always been a drop-in center for seniors, family, um, and it definitely needed a refresh.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2019, we talked about potentially doing a reno for upstairs here. One of the funniest descriptions I've heard about what it looked like back then was that one of the kids of one of our directors said it reminded them of Grandma's house.
I don't even know if it was Grandma's house or Grandma's basement,
Well,
where
yeah.
all the old furniture goes to die.
So the
and-
plan was to do a refresh up here.
Mm-hmm.
And then it morphed into maybe this particular wall where we talk about the history of the Edmonton Mah Society, highlighting some key dates, prominent Mahs that through the history throughout the history of the Mah Society in Edmonton.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of and getting rid of some of our old furniture and a fresh coat of paint.
Yeah.
In the fall of 2019, the Mah Society had their second heritage tour. So the Mah Society took a bunch of Mahs and non-Mahs to China, and part of that tour was to go visit ancestral villages.
Mm-hmm.
So
Oh, wow.
people that were born here that have never been back to China had the opportunity to visit the villages where their parents or grandparents originally grew up.
Oh my goodness.
And a part of that tour was a museum on immigration
Mm-hmm.
in China.
Yes.
And from that, Sue and Andrea, who are the curators of our exhibit downstairs, came up with this great idea and got approved by the board, and they went with it. And 3 years later, in 2024, Chinese New Year's, so in February 2024, we opened the Journey of the Horse exhibit, which includes the upstairs here, which is the history of the Mah Society of Edmonton, which has been around for over 100 years. And then downstairs is more of a general exhibit on Chinese immigrating from China to Canada, settling in Canada, with a focus on Mah and Edmonton. So downstairs, we've got all kinds of history, stories from some of our elders of what it was like coming to Canada, and then just some cultural information.
The name Ma actually means horse, literally means horse.
Oh.
And I always thought that was cool growing up in Alberta and cowboy country. I thought, okay, I have a connection here. But it also speaks to me, it also spoke to the fact that my parents had traveled halfway around the world to a country where they didn't know the customs, they didn't speak the language very well, if at all, but they were willing to do that and willing to travel like so many of the ancestors before them, because it meant making a difference in their lives and the lives of future generations. I've actually been back to my dad's village in China, and it was eye-opening. It was
Yes.
180 degrees, so far different from what I grew up in suburban Calgary, suburban Alberta, and the lifestyle that I would have compared to here.
The first time I went back was with my whole family, my two brothers, my parents, and my sister-in-law. One of my brothers was married at the time in 1992.
Okay.
And we went back to the village, and I started thinking, my mom's village is just down the road. Who's to say my dad and my mom couldn't have gotten together in China, and me born in China, and I'd be a rice farmer rather than having a university education here in Canada.
Now Doug gets his tan from golfing and festivals. He doesn't actually have to work in the rice field, so we're happy for him.
I would have been this color in the rice field.
That is very cool. Yeah, and it's crazy to think about that, because you're right. Like, your life could have been completely different if you were there versus them meeting here. And wow, that's so interesting. Are you guys planning another trip to go back with the Mah Society, or just by yourself?
There is talk about a potential trip later this year, but we haven't gotten any details yet. So it may happen. Well, it will happen again, whether it's this year or
eventually,
because it was very popular. We had one in 2018, then 2019, and then COVID hit.
Oh, okay.
So and then we haven't had one since.
And so, how many people usually go?
I think the one that I was on, there was about 40.
Oh, wow. That's so fun.
We're at an interesting, I think we're at a bit of a crossroads, because when I went back with my dad and siblings, it was hiring a minivan, and that person would drive you out. But now you can have GPS, like on our map, and you get the GPS coordinates.
Yes.
You can find. I have no idea how to find my dad's village. I need to find out how to find the GPS coordinates of my dad's village so that I can figure out how to get there. But it definitely is an advantage to have the connections in the old country, so that somebody says, "Oh, yes, so and so will take you there, and it will cost you this much."
It's nice.
Another interesting thing is, like, when I went in 1992, there were still, I wouldn't say a lot of people, but there was like maybe a couple of dozen people still living in the village where my dad grew up in. My mom's village was down to maybe less than 10.
Wow.
When I went back to my dad's village in 2019, there was probably less than 10 people living there.
Oh my goodness.
A lot of the homes have become abandoned because their kids are now working in the city. So the parents will move with them to the city, or like, for example, our family, everybody's here, right? So we still have an ancestry house or home in China, in the village.
Do you guys have a favorite event you held?
It was interesting. Viola and I were talking about that this morning, and because I've been around a little bit longer than her in terms of the society, because my dad was the director, so I came to a bunch of it. So two of the ones that have been kind of a historical, not historical, but that have been around a long time, is the spring dinner, which we have at one of the Chinese restaurants that we'll have 300 to 400 people at.
Wow.
and that's like multiple generations. You got the seniors, and you got
Mhm.
their grandkids coming and stuff like that. So I really enjoy that event, and our barbecue, which is also a family event,
Mhm.
where kids are out running around in the park, and then what I really enjoy is these impromptu pop-up events kind of thing.
Mhm.
Like my mother and some of the other elderly ladies will be here, and they'll be chatting, and they will talking about, oh, we should make this. And next thing you know, they're coming here. That one lady will buy some of the ingredients, another will buy the other ingredients, and they'll come and make it here. And
Mhm.
some of the next generation, I'm not going to say it is the I was going to say younger, but it's really just the next generation, will come and learn as well how to make it.
Mhm.
But it's nothing that's really planned or official.
Yeah, or like plastered out there, put on like social media or
Yeah,
the website, just
yeah,
impromptu. I like
yeah,
that.
yeah. So Viola, like I said, she's only been on the board for a year now.
About
Yeah,
a year.
but
Mhm.
kind of she's been involved with helping out with the exhibit and stuff for about a year and a half. So right, so her favorite events are a little bit different than my favorite events.
Mhm.
So
We are super fortunate to have one of the four guardians of Chinatown on our east wall. We have the Azure Dragon of the East, painted
Mhm.
by Busy Rock, and it's a two-story blue dragon on a yellow background. It's gorgeous. And in September of 2024, there was an unveiling. And I thought, I don't know how you unveil a wall that's been there outside, but it was fantastic. The wall was animated through video production, and it turned
Wow.
into this great uh, meeting point of Indigenous and Chinese cultures and local Edmonton artists and performers. There were kids of all ages. There were different local vendors and food trucks. And it was just so cool to see this little corner of downtown Edmonton come alive
Mhm.
and be vivid and vibrant like that and encompass all those things, old,
mhm.
new, cultural, a nod to the land that we live on.
Mhm.
It was beautiful.
So you kind of spoke a bit about this, but having all of those different generations, how do you kind of cater to all of them, or do you think just being the Mah Society kind of just caters to everyone?
Food.
Literal catering.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a common
Yeah, I
denominator.
mean,
Mhm.
I think it's food, and
Mhm.
then that kind of brings people here, and then it just kind of morphs into other activities like mahjong.
Mhm.
So, but I think it's the food that brings the generations together.
Yeah, kind of the initial is food,
Yeah,
and then you just stay for the good company.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so, what would you say the Moss Society's mission is?
Well, we actually have a mission statement on our website.
Mhm.
I'd forgotten about it, and I looked it up. We had so I mentioned how the society got created,
Mhm.
and over time, the Chinese community, the Mahs, have become more integrated in Canadian society.
Mhm.
So the need for that support group wasn't really there anymore,
Okay, yeah.
and the society started to shrink. It was still a place to gather for the elders, but for the next generation, future generations, there wasn't really anything here. We tried to bring activities in, but it's like one-offs, like barbecues and the
Mhm.
dinners and stuff like that. So we had a meeting to talk about what our future is and whether there is actually a need to have the Law Society. And we did come together and came up with a mission statement of what our purpose is.
Mhm.
And I had forgotten all about it. Then I go, let me look it up. And I have it here. The Mah Society is committed to maintain our ancestry and develop a network of Mah families to foster a powerful and influential organization within our community. And the other thing that I think it's not in this is to provide the future generations a place to learn about their ancestors and
Mhm.
what they went through for them to have the opportunities that they have here.
Yeah.
And also for the elders, it's a place to gather and reminisce about the past.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say is the most rewarding part of working at the Mah Society?
Hmm.
It's very rewarding to see different generations connecting. I love our mahjong nights because there are people of all backgrounds and different generations. My daughter will see classmates that she knew from going to the Chinese bilingual program in elementary school. We will have seniors who have heard, who are not Mahs and not necessarily connected to the Mah Society, but they've heard we have mahjong nights, so they'll drop in and play a hand or two. And it might be a slightly different style of mahjong, but there seems to be adaptation. It's so rewarding to see that interaction, and not necessarily always not necessarily with the need to pass on a bit of knowledge or impart some wisdom, but just to hang out in the same space and be together.
Yeah, just kind of connect with people.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
For one of the things for me is meeting a whole bunch of new people, and also introducing the Mah Society to people that wasn't aware there was a Mah Society.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've talked to a number of friends or acquaintances that are Mahs, and I mention that, and they go, "There's a Mah Society? There's a building?
And there's a mission."
Yeah, there's a mission. And the exhibit that's brought a lot of people down here to see the people that haven't been in the building or ever, or haven't been in this building for 30 years, to come back to the Mah Society and check out the exhibit and start coming to some of our events again.
Mm-hmm. And so we kind of spoke a bit about this, but why do you think it's so important to have something like the Mah Society in Edmonton?
Part of the exhibit of Journey of the Horse are photographs of different businesses that have been operated by Mah families over the years. And it's been interesting to hear people say, "Oh, yeah, we had a store, but I don't think we had any photographs. We were too busy working." And I've experienced the same thing. My parents had a store, a little corner store in Calgary, but I think there may be 2 photographs over the decades that they had the store, because we were too busy working. And in this day and age, with I probably have more photographs of last Tuesday and what I had for lunch than of anything else growing up. But in this day and age, it's not necessarily the photograph. It's taking time to capture the moment and understand the history and understand what's going on and what happened and maybe what's possible next.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for me, before I became a director of the Mah Society, I didn't really think about this, but it's really important to pass on some of the history, some of the knowledge, some of the recipes to the next generation. And I mean, when my mother passes, some of those recipes are going to be gone.
Yeah.
Unless we document them and show the next generation how to make it. Right. Sometimes it's not a written recipe. It's a pinch of this, a dash of this. A friend of mine was telling me he was trying to make a recipe that his mom made, and it called for a cup of flour. It never turned out, but he found out afterwards it was a specific cup that she used. So it wasn't.
It was the
official,
blue cup of flour. It
So,
needed to be the blue cup.
So he basically used that cup and measured it. And now he knows exactly how many grams of flour he needs.
That's so funny you say that, because I think my mom has a couple different recipes from my grandma. And she's like, "I can't make this because what do you mean it's this cup or this bowl or just a little bit until it tastes right? Like, what do you mean?"
Yeah.
And then last question, it doesn't need to pertain to the Mah Society, but what is the best piece of advice you've received throughout your life?
That was a question I really struggled with. I couldn't think of anything specific, but I'm not sure it's wisdom. So as more of an observation. When the exhibit first opened, I was volunteering downstairs, and this woman came to see the exhibit, and she was thrilled. In fact, she wasn't even Mah or even of Chinese descent, but she really enjoyed the exhibit, talking about how we been able to maintain some of our, history and our culture and stuff for future generations. And that's the whole purpose of this exhibit. And she said to me that she heard something recently, and she said this to me, and I've never forgotten it. When an elder passes, a library burns down.
Wow.
So to preserve that history is so important.
That's beautiful.
And get that information before it's too late. Right? Get that knowledge and information, history, the stories, the recipes.
Wow. I never thought of it like that, but like that makes sense.
Yeah, it sure does.
Yeah.
It sure does. I had to think about this one because I wanted to tie it back to my culture and my heritage somehow. And my parents' advice to me was generally of the variety of study hard, be doctor, be lawyer. There's a Chinese tradition. When you excuse yourself from the dinner table, you say to the people that are still left at the table, "Mat man het lo." So that's in Toisanese, which is the Ma family dialect. In Cantonese, it would be "Mat man sik fan lo," and it translates to take your time and finish eating. Take your time eating. And I never really thought about it, but in a bigger sense, coming from a background of very rural farm life where you worked for everything that you had to grow everything that you ate, and then coming from an immigrant background where my parents worked very, very hard to raise 5 children and have my grandmother living in the house at the same time. It translates to me as take your time and enjoy what you have when you have it. I'm really happy to say that after my parents finally retired from the store and sold it, they had lots of years of meeting with a social group really similar to the Mah Society, sometimes with the Mah Society, and another social group that was based from their background in Toisan, China, down in Calgary. And they actually got to enjoy everything that they did after the hard work of raising, again, 5 kids and making a life for themselves as immigrants to a new country. So yeah, it's take your time, enjoy what you have when you have it, and take your fill.
That's beautiful. Thank you both so much for sitting down with us.
You're welcome.
Hi everyone, we just finished up at the Mah Society and wow.
No, honestly, like I was just telling Rochelle 2 seconds ago off camera, like truly I think they were one of my favorite interviews. Like the amount of history and love and care and thought that goes into this place, like, and the evolution of the building and the ownership and everything that's come into it is so great to see and so important. And the aspect of community and stuff I just think is so important, and the fact that they're still keeping that up and it's still active and still bumping. It's
for
so
real.
great.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. They were 2 of the sweetest people I think I've ever met. Just them so willing to share like the history and just like the little like small things about their life and their story and like their family's life and just like the Mah Society in general. Like it's just amazing to see, and I think it's so important to have these spaces like this. And it also isn't just for Mahs.
No.
Anyone can go and play Mahjong. Check it out, it's really cool. Apparently the aunties make really good food there too. So
and the exhibit truly like it really like comes alive. Like it was so cool to see, and the way that Andrea and Sue had set everything up, I think it's such a good thing that you guys should definitely check out if you're ever in the area, because it's also free to see. Do reserve online if you want, so then they know to have volunteers there. But I think it's so worth it to check it out.
It definitely is. You definitely need to go check it out.
Yeah.